Hello and welcome back to our Down and Dirty mini movies. This is another short film in our help series of our TopCon products to show some of the main selling features of the different products that we have. Now this is video number 3. We're going to be going back to Magnet Field, but also we're going to be talking a lot with Magnet Tools. And we're going to be creating some new custom codes specifically with attributes. Now these attributes are going to be used a lot of times for GIS applications, but a lot of your utility districts are be collecting a lot of their waypoints with attribute information to describe different things. And specifically with this tutorial, we're going to be creating a custom codes with attributes for a water district. Now my videos are not meant to be a true training exercises. For those, please visit what the professional service team has put together on our e-learning website. That's where you would need to go for true training lessons. For other resources, also on your My TopCon Now app on your phone, or you can grab that from your browser and link it right from the TopCon Positioning homepage. So as we begin, you're going to notice your screen looks a whole lot different than it has in the past. We're actually in Magnet Tools program, and this is where most of the time we actually create codes and attribute files from scratch. Just because of the environment that you're in. Normally you're at a desktop and you have a full alphanumeric keypad that you can type in, so it's really maybe more fast and more appropriate to do that. Now you can still do it in Magnet Field. It's just cosmetically it's going to look a little bit different. I just called up the last job I was working on. You do have to be in a job to create a codes list. And this one actually has some codes, but since we're just playing around, I'm going to type in number 1 and let's create a new job. Down and dirty, create a quick job. I'm going to create a brand new job just from scratch. Doesn't have any information in here whatsoever. So one thing about a lot of our programs of TopCon, it brings up the same views that you've seen in the past. So one thing I need to open up, I need to go to View and bring up a Codes view. So we have our Codes view, and similar to Magnet Field, you have normally the basic code or description on the left-hand side, and then if you build an attributes for that, it's going to be on the right-hand side. So we're actually going to be using, I've got 3 codes, and with these 3 codes, I think I have enough attributes that basically will explain all the attribute options that it gives us and gives us a full, I guess, lesson without typing in tons of codes and so forth. So we try to keep it quick and simple, but try to encompass everything. So let's begin by creating a new code. Now one thing that's similar with a lot of our products, if you don't know where to start, I notice this a lot when we're in like TopCon Receiver Utility. If you don't know where to start, you need to right click. So we'll right click and notice that it populates the box here where we can actually start with a brand new code. Now I'm going to start with what's called a gate valve. Call it a GV for the name. And it is actually just a point. These codes can be either line, point, or area. I'm not for sure what auto actually does, but we'll just leave that at point. And all the valves are going to be under their own particular layer. We can get a little bit deeper under, this is not a line, so we'll leave that alone. Under point, we can actually give that its own color, and also the point symbol of the valve, whatever that might be. If it's part of a surface, you can leave those checked on. We're actually going to uncheck those. We'll click Apply and click OK. So this is our very first description. This is what's similar to what you normally shoot as a surveyor. You just shoot a basic simple description. But we need to record more information about our descriptions, which are called attributes. So let's right click and create a new attribute. Now when we begin our new attributes, we have a couple of options here. We have what's called an integer, real number, text, menu, date and time, and a Boolean. Just to give you a little bit of a description between these two, integer is numbers that can be negative or positive, but no fractions. Real numbers basically are positive numbers. They can be decimals and fractions and so forth. Text is what it is. You just type in a text. If we choose a menu, then we can actually choose from multiple options of a menu. Date and time, and then Boolean. This is basically a true or false statement. When we create a attribute in Magnet Field, it's abbreviated to just say bool. Now this particular code of a gate valve is just a point, and there's just one thing that we want to know about it. It's basically a true or false statement. Is this a left hand turn or not? If I can spell. Default value for this is true, and it is actually required. Very simple to create an attribute. We're going to right click back over here, and let's create us our second code. And again, we're going to be only doing 3 codes for this particular example, but I think we can cover all the attributes options here. So we're going to begin with service. You got to remember SM for service meter. It is another point. All the meters are going to be on their particular layer. We give it our point color and meters. I think I'm making money with that. And whatever symbol for the meter, and click apply. But let's first, don't want to use these in services either. Alright. Now very importantly that you actually are clicking on the right one when you actually create your attribute. So highlight it, new attribute. Basically on a service meter, we're going to do 2 different options here. Number one, it's just a text, and this is actually the meter reading. There's no default value that I'll put on here. It's just going to be a text, and we'll be able to type in the information of the reading. And then click OK. And let's do one more attribute. And this is actually going to be a date and time. This is the date of install. Now it's actually going to bring up a default date that we're going to save here, but when we record the waypoint, we can actually edit that information. And we'll click apply and OK. So we're moving right along. Let's do one more. We'll do one more new code. And this is a little bit more information. This is the actual water line itself. Remember, just WL. And it is going to be a line feature, and it's going to be on its own layer with water lines. Now here we'll get into the line features of it. If we want the custom color, line style, and you could even give it a width, for example. It's neither point or area. We'll turn that off if we don't need to be part of a service or so forth. Now before I type in the attributes, I do want to show you that there's a lot of information that's listed here that we actually have covered up, so you can actually see that information. And you can actually edit some of this information by clicking here. So I'm going to highlight the water line, right click, new attribute. I'll look at my list for the water line, and basically I want to first start off with a menu. And this is the actual material that it's actually made out of. Alright. There's nothing in the default value list. Let's actually start with copper, and we'll add that, and the add concrete, and then PVC. We'll click add that. Now whatever you want to be the default, like PVC, make sure it's in this list before you continue on, and you click apply and OK. Alright, let's do one more attribute for it. Besides the material, we need the actual diameter of this. So it's just going to be a simple text. So what is called it, pipe diameter. We don't really want a default value. Well, let's actually do that. Let's say it's a 6 inch. And let's hit apply and OK. So basically that's all it. Whether it's a real number, a text, menu, date or time, or a true-false statement, I believe we've covered that just with the 3 codes. Now for a full utility code database, you just keep adding the information and it would be stored to this particular job. One option you could do is take your default database and import it into here and remove items that you don't need and keep the ones that you do, and then we could export this out to our own particular database. So I'm going to highlight exactly what I need. I'm going to right click and I'm going to export this to a file. And I'm going to actually save this to the IE files folder. Now I've practiced this, so I've already done it one time, so it's actually in here, and I'm going to overwrite that. But while we're here, I do want to show you that you do have XML files that are MXL for magnet, and that's the ones we used with our database code in video number 2. What we want to make sure that we use code layers, and the only option we have is an XML. MagnetField doesn't really care if it's got an XML extension at the end or an MXL for MagnetField. It does not care. Basically, choose XML, type in your description list, and then hit save. Now you're not going to see this message when you create yours because it should not exist, but I'm going to say yes, and then it's going to be there. So that completes what we're going to be doing in Magnet Tools. Now let's jump over to MagnetField. So back at MagnetField, let's run through an example of creating us a new job that we're going to actually do for a water utility district, and we're going to bring in that database file and map our path to that so we can actually use it. So let's just create us a brand new job really quick, down and dirty, just number 1, and we'll create this job. Now I have not imported the database like we used in the example. We're actually going to pull that information when we actually record the points. Under our configure our settings, we need to check a couple of things here. Number 1, I believe it would all be under codes here. We want to go to our settings here, and notice when we click here, it actually using a vertical codes list. Apparently that's where I had it last. We actually want to change it and pull up that water utility database file and use it. Now I'm looking in my IE file folder. That's where I remember storing it, but I do not see it because we're using MXL. And notice in Tools we have the option to save it as an XML. MagnetField doesn't care if it's MXL or XML, and we'll choose that. So now we have our path mapped, and it's going to pull from that particular database. And with attributes, you definitely want to go ahead and turn on to prompt for your description, so it actually would populate or bring up the option to change and add attributes. So we're actually, make sure we're connected. We are, and we're actually going to measure a couple of points for an example here. So we'll go to Survey, Topo. Now I do not have to type a description in ahead of time. When we're ready to actually measure a point, we'll just measure it, and it's going to prompt us to fill out the data automatically. So we'll hit the drop down and notice I have the three codes with attributes that we created. So let's just measure a gate valve and notice that it comes up, and this is the bool, a boolean, which is just a true false statement, and I could is this a left hand, true or false? We can actually pick that or leave it true and then store the point. Move up to another point that we want to measure. Let's store it. Again, choose our service meter this time. Now one thing I'm actually going to do here is I'm actually going to hit OK. And if you remember, we clicked on the required tab, so it will not let you bypass this without typing in the information for whatever your meter reading is. And then also you can choose your date of install. Go back to 2018, whatever date it is. Scroll here and then store the point. Now you can also, we haven't checked in, but you can actually change layers, take a photo of it, and store that all along with this information. Alright. One more code we want to do, set simulator here. Let's measure it. And this time we're actually going to choose the actual water line. And we'll give this a string value. Notice that there's none in the list here. So this is the first water line we are collecting. So this is string number 1. I don't know if I've explained this before, but your control code, since this is a line feature, your control codes allows you to do an arc in, arc start, like you may be familiar with, and we're actually going to cover that in a later video. So I have the default material set up here. If you click, you can actually change that, and then also if this is maybe a 12-inch instead of the default 6-inch, we can actually change that information. So this is a water line, going to be string 1, and let's store this point. Now let's measure our second point on the water line. We'll choose our code, we'll choose water line. We'll pick our string 1 and remember that from the list. Now notice here it went back to the 6-inch pipe. Now we're actually collecting a 12-inch. Now if this was copper, whatever the defaults is, it doesn't matter. We can actually hit repeat and it remembers the last code information. So just hit repeat. You don't have to type all this information in here and go on. Now one other thing I want to show you that possibly you haven't or not familiar with, we can actually do multiple codes. So multiple codes, this tees off to a gate valve that we want to store along with this. So magnet field allows us to store multiple codes at one time. And this drew the line and stored the point for the water line. Now before we finish up here, I want to store one more code with attributes in magnet field just to make sure we can see the difference between it and tools. Now I actually could just measure the point with this new code and it would store it as I shot the point. The problem is I did not, when I tested this, see that it actually prompted to actually enter the attributes along with it. So saying that, let's go back out to the home screen, go to Edit, Codes, and let's add us a new code. And this is going to be a water line bend. Is the way they describe it. Basically they want us to identify when we have a turn in the line what the angle is for that. Now this is actually part of the water line, so we'll choose water line. We'll just leave it as a point feature. And is it a surface? We're not going to use that in a surface, and let's store that. So with this highlighted, we will add the attributes at this time, and all we're adding is just what we're calling the angle. Alright, and it will be a menu, and One option would be 11.25, add that to the list, 45, a 90, and then we'll just do a T. We won't actually use a default in this one. We'll check on required just to make sure we do type in the attribute, and let's actually store that. So we have that saved. One more shot or measurement. Let's go to survey, topo. Let's continue on. Let's measure this particular point. We're going to choose waterline and string, repeat, multiple codes, add the waterline bend. We'll set the angle. It turns a 90 here, and let's store that point. So as we close, I want to bring back the slide from video number 2 and remind you that Magnet Field reads description codes from the database. So this particular job we were just working in was just reading from the database. I did not bring it in completely like I used an example in video number 2. A particular Magnet Field job only stores codes used for that particular job. So if we would have just used waterline, for example, and then maybe created a waterline bend, this particular job would have 2 codes in it, and that's it. Now that waterline bend was a new code. It's created in the job, and it was not updated to the main database that we're actually pulling from. All right. Adding codes to that original database requires working with a complete list of the codes within the job and then re-updating the database with additions. So I'm just going to say that in this particular job, let's say I started with a database, Waterline Utility District, that had 30 codes. Today I did a job. I was reading from the database. I used a couple, 3 or 4 of those codes. I ended up creating 5 new codes. Well, this job only has maybe 3 plus the 5, 8 codes. The database has 20 of some. I would probably want to go to Import Export Exchange, read in the complete codes list, so I'm adding the complete database to these 5 codes, and then turn around and exporting them out, overwriting the database, and now I have a database of the original 20 plus codes, whatever it was, plus the new 5 that will be used for job number 2, 3, 4 in the future. And that's how you keep maintaining and updating the custom database. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you learned something that will help you down the road. For suggestions, send me a text or email, and we will possibly create another tutorial for that. Thank you.